Well, good evening. It is so good to see you all out this evening. We're in Hebrews chapter 1, so go ahead and flip over there if you will. And then, if you didn't get a book, just go ahead and raise your hand. I can hand that out real quick. Okay, yeah. So just three of them. What, we got red, yellow, or blue. Any preference? All right. I'll bring one of each, and y'all can fight over it. There you go. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So I wanted to start up on the structure again. Someone asked me to go ahead and put it up because they wanted the organization, and so I went ahead and figured we'll start there just as a quick reminder of how Hebrews is organized. It's a chiastic structure, which means it's an argument, or in this case, it's a sermon that makes the same points just in reverse order. And so as it's going, what we're going to see is that the exhortations that the Hebrew author is making will repeat themselves later in the book in a different fashion to make the same point or to kind of just reinforce the ideas that he has already discussed. You can see up there, I've got 4 exhortations of the author. Breaks it down pretty simply. There is a section there, probably about chapter 4 to about chapter 7, where he has to pause. And he has to essentially tell his audience or his people, hey, you guys aren't ready for what's coming next, and so because of that, we need to take a time out and start going back over some of these fundamental teachings or handle this rebuke before we delve any deeper. And we'll get to that when we get to those chapters. Chapter 13, that'll just be his kind of general conclusion. He'll make a couple more exhortations, but then he really ends up with just saying, the typical conclusions, so-and-so are praying for you, or we're looking forward to this, or so on. But we'll get then. I was still able to get some good questions out of chapter 13, even though it was a little conclusion chapter. And that's what the binders really are. It's the discussion questions we'll try and go over when we have just a class based on discussion. And if you look on the front sheet, there's also a schedule. And so you can see on that schedule when we're going to just try and have a discussion on Wednesday night about what we talk about on Sunday. If we bleed over into Sunday with some of the stuff we weren't able to cover, if we bleed over into Wednesday with stuff that we aren't able to cover on Sunday, I think that'll be fine. But I'm really hoping for Wednesdays to be a big, we can ask the questions, we can get some good conversation and discussion about the way you might see Hebrews or the way you might interpret a passage or a quotation in ways that might be different than me and may help me see it in a different light or a better understanding as well as everyone else here. As far as that, we'll go ahead and jump right into Hebrews chapter 1. I do want to remind everyone the main point of the entire book, chapter 2, verse 1. Therefore, we must pay much closer attention to what we have heard, lest we drift away from it. The Hebrew author is going to come back, as you can see there, in just about every single chapter and go back to this idea. Don't drift away. Don't allow yourself, and he's using this kind of boating imagery, don't allow yourself to become untethered to the dock and slowly drift out to sea until you can no longer see what you once were tethered to. Stay fastened, stay steadfast, be connected to God. And so we will see that as we go through. I know I gave you all homework on Sunday. If you didn't, I won't give you homework every single time. Honestly, that will probably be the only homework assignment I do give, except for the questions that you can fill out in advance time. That was just the simple idea of trying to read through Hebrews between then and now, and I'll extend it. You can really do that whenever. It really only takes 30 minutes to sit down and read through the book of Hebrews. It's 13 chapters, and it's a good way to just familiarize yourself with some ideas, get a good feel for how the book is going to go, or as we'll see as the sermon, as what I like to call it because that's what it is written as, is presented. And that way, we can go back and look at different things. And as I mentioned on Sunday, I do like to read the chapters as we go through. For some of the longer chapters, I'll break that up and not just sit here and read for like 10 minutes and whatnot. Even though that's helpful, it's also helpful to kind of draw some points out as we go through. But with chapter 1, it's only 14 verses, so if you'll join with me, we'll go ahead and read the whole chapter. Long ago, and at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom he also created the world. He is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. After making purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much superior to angels as the name he has inherited is more excellent than theirs. For to which of the angels did God ever say, 'You are my son, today I have begotten you'? Or again, 'I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son'? And again, when he brings the firstborn into the world, he says, 'Let all God's angels worship him.' Of the angels, he says, He makes his angels winds, and his ministers a flame of fire. But of the Son, he says, 'Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of uprightness is the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness beyond your companions. And you, Lord, laid the foundation of the earth in the beginning, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They will all wear out like a garment. Like a robe you will roll them up. Like a garment they will be changed. But you are the same, and your years will have no end. And to which of the angels has he ever said, 'Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet'? Are they not all ministering spirits sent out to serve for the sake of those who are to inherit salvation?" So there we get a good feel for the way this chapter goes. And you can see right off the bat, there's a heavy use of quotation. In fact, when you look in chapter 1, and we're going to do this before every chapter, there's kind of just a chapter snapshot. There are 7 Old Testament quotations in chapter 1. And when you look at them, they're based around one main idea: Jesus and angels, which is better? And really, it's this idea of two supernatural, two heavenly beings that need to be considered and understood. And what we'll see as we go through there is that each of them has a role, and yet there is one whose role far surpasses the other. And so what we're going to get, as we'll see throughout the remainder of the book, is a compare and contrast right now between Jesus and the angels, which then he'll come back to the same way of teaching. He'll do a compare and contrast between Jesus and Moses, and Jesus and Abraham, and Jesus and Joshua, and he'll constantly go back and forth. He'll do the same with the Levitical priests and Aaron and Melchizedek. It's kind of his tool to present an argument. He's saying, here's something that is good, let me show you something that's great. And he's talking about Jesus. Sorry, I got to remember to keep track on my iPad as I'm keeping track up here. Really what we see here is a main idea. Don't hyper-fixate on creations, but focus and fixate on Jesus. And I think this is a wonderful way that the sermon starts in Hebrews. He's not worried about, hey, we got to lay a foundation, we got to lay some ground. He's saying, here is what you need to know from the beginning of this sermon to the end when I say my goodbyes. Really, I've also got a chapter point. I kind of forget about that because I get caught up. Jesus is the greatest. Think about the transfiguration in Matthew chapter 17. When Jesus, Peter, James, and John are all on top of the mountain. And you see Moses and Elijah, and they're white, and they look really special. And Peter opens up his mouth before Jesus and says, hey, let's build tabernacles for all of you so we can worship all of you. Because to Peter, he's in a moment where he doesn't really know what to say. He just feels like he has to say something, which is often the case with Peter. And immediately when he says that, God speaks through the heavens, and he says, no, focus on Jesus. That's the point here in Hebrews. That's the point of this chapter. That's really the point of the whole book, that Jesus is the most important being in the entire biblical story. And if we aren't careful by trying to fixate on great individuals or great examples of God's power in the form of the angels, we can miss the importance and the special uniqueness in Jesus. And so we'll see that point as we go through the rest of this chapter. Are there any questions or comments so far on just that before we really dig into verse by verse? All right, so, come on. Okay, we'll figure that out. Chapter 1, it starts with the beginning look back to the prophetic age. And if you see there in verse 1, one of the ways I work is I like to go verse by verse, and I'll break down kind of the sentence and the way he speaks. And when you look there, he talks in a certain ways about the old times. In many times and in many ways, God spoke to our prophets, the angels. And so what he is saying is you go back to that time and look how different it is. Look at how God used to work. Sorry, I was reading and my brain went too fast. It's this